My husband acted perfect during my pregnancy, but I didn't realize perfection can sometimes feel more suspicious than love. My name is Olivia Carter, and I was 6 months pregnant when I started believing my marriage had finally turned into something I had always prayed for. My husband, Ethan Brooks, had changed completely, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. Before my pregnancy, our marriage was far from perfect. We had distance between us that neither of us really talked about. Some nights we barely spoke at dinner, and other times we shared the same bed, but felt like strangers living parallel lives. I used to wonder if we were slowly drifting apart without even noticing it. But the moment I became pregnant, something in Ethan shifted so suddenly that it almost felt unreal. It wasn't gradual, it was immediate, like a switch had flipped inside him. He became attentive in a way I had never experienced before in our entire relationship. He started waking up early just to make me breakfast, even when he had work. He would ask me how I was feeling multiple times a day, even when I already told him I was fine. He would gently place his hand on my stomach and talk to our unborn baby like it already meant everything to him. There were moments when I would catch him just looking at me quietly, like he was finally seeing me in a way he hadn't before. For the first time in years, I felt emotionally safe in my marriage. I stopped overthinking. I stopped questioning. I stopped preparing myself for disappointment. I told myself, maybe this was what love was supposed to feel like when it finally worked. Maybe this pregnancy had healed something in him that I had been trying to fix for years. I even started trusting him more than I had in a long time. But what I didn't realize was that sometimes the most dangerous phase of a relationship is not when things are falling apart, it's when everything suddenly feels too perfect. Because perfection doesn't give you warnings. It makes you relax. It makes you stop looking for problems. And that's exactly what happened to me. There was one small change I noticed first, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was his phone. At the beginning, everything was normal. He would leave it on the couch, on the table, sometimes even let me use it if mine wasn't around. But slowly, almost without me noticing, that changed. He started keeping it closer to him all the time. If we were watching TV, it was in his hand or face down on his lap. If he got a message, he would instinctively tilt the screen away from me. If I walked into a room, he would sometimes pause what he was doing and quickly lock his phone, even if nothing seemed unusual. At first, I told myself I was just being sensitive because of pregnancy hormones. I didn't want to ruin the peace we had finally found. I didn't want to question the only good phase our marriage had in years. So I ignored it. I smiled through it. I convinced myself it meant nothing. But deep down, a quiet discomfort started forming inside me, something I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't fear yet. It wasn't suspicion yet. It was just that feeling you get when something familiar starts feeling slightly unfamiliar, even if you can't prove why. Then one evening changed everything. It started like a completely normal night. Ethan came home earlier than usual, which had become common lately, and he even brought groceries with him. He was in a good mood, talking about baby names again, asking me what I thought about certain options, smiling like he had no stress in the world. He cooked dinner for both of us, something he had started doing more often during my pregnancy, and we sat together in the living room afterward like a normal couple. For a while, everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful, like life had finally settled into something stable. Then he stood up and walked toward the kitchen to grab something he forgot. He left his phone on the couch beside me. The screen was unlocked. I wasn't planning to look at it. I wasn't suspicious enough yet to justify that. I had never been the type of wife to check phones or invade privacy like that. But sometimes you don't choose what you see. Sometimes it just happens in front of you. The screen lit up with a notification. Just one. A name I had never seen before appeared on the screen. Rachel Dawson. My heart slowed instantly, not because I understood what it meant, but because something about seeing a stranger's name attached to my husband felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Then another message preview appeared beneath it. I only caught a few words, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. I froze for a moment, just staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing while also trying to convince myself it meant nothing. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe I was overthinking something completely harmless. But even as I tried to calm myself, my instincts didn't agree. Because the timing of everything suddenly fell off. The way Ethan had been acting lately, the sudden perfection, the emotional intensity, it all started to feel less like love and more like effort. Like something carefully maintained. And then Ethan came back into the room, smiling like nothing had happened. Like the world was still exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes ago. And that's when it hit me. The scariest part wasn't the message itself. It was how normal everything still looked around it. Because I realized that if I hadn't seen that notification at that exact second, I would have continued believing my marriage was perfect. And I had no idea yet that this one moment was going to change the way I looked at my husband forever. After that night, I couldn't go back to being the same Olivia Carter who believed everything was fine, because even though I acted normal on the outside, something inside me had already shifted in a way I couldn't undo. Ethan Brooks still behaved like the perfect husband during my pregnancy, still attentive, still caring, still doing all the things that made me doubt my doubts, but now I was watching him differently, like I was trying to see through something that wasn't fully visible. The problem was, nothing about him was openly wrong. That made it worse. There were no obvious signs, no arguments, no cold behavior I could point to and say, this is the problem. Instead, it was small things, subtle things. The way his phone was always turned away when I entered a room. The way he would suddenly stop typing if I got too close. The way he started stepping outside for calls that used to happen freely in front of me without any secrecy at all. I started noticing patterns instead of moments, and once you start seeing patterns, it becomes impossible to unsee them. One evening, while Ethan was in the shower, his phone lit up again on the nightstand, and my chest tightened immediately before I even looked at it, because my mind already knew what name I was going to see. Rachel Dawson. It wasn't just a notification this time. It was multiple messages, arriving one after another, like an ongoing conversation that didn't pause even when he wasn't physically holding the phone. I didn't touch it, but I didn't need to anymore, because just seeing the frequency of it told me everything I wasn't ready to admit yet. This wasn't random. This wasn't innocent. This was consistent. And consistency means time, effort, and emotional space that I wasn't part of. I sat there frozen, trying to calm myself, trying to find a harmless explanation that could protect the version of my marriage I still wanted to believe in, but nothing came. Instead, my thoughts started filling in gaps I didn't want to look at. Maybe this wasn't just a reconnecting ex. Maybe this wasn't just a casual conversation. Maybe this had been happening for longer than I realized. Later that night, I lay in bed beside Ethan while he slept peacefully, his breathing steady, his face calm like nothing in the world was wrong, and I felt something deeply unsettling about that contrast. Because I was wide awake, mentally replaying everything, while the man I was questioning was completely at peace next to me. That was the moment I realized the hardest part wasn't finding proof, yet it was living beside someone who could hide an entire secret life so well that you only start noticing it when it's already too late to pretend you don't see it. By the next morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore, because what I had seen the night before wasn't fading from my mind. It was getting louder the more I tried to silence it. Ethan Brooks still acted completely normal during my pregnancy, still playing the role of the perfect husband, still making breakfast, still checking on me, still smiling at me like I was the center of his world. But now every gesture felt like it had a second layer I couldn't see. I started paying attention to things I never cared about before, like how quickly he turned his phone face down when I entered a room, how he suddenly became very private with simple messages, and how he started taking calls outside even when there was no reason to leave the room. It wasn't one big moment anymore. It was a buildup of small inconsistencies that were slowly forming a truth I didn't want to accept. One afternoon, when Ethan went to take a shower and left his phone charging on the kitchen counter, I stood there staring at it longer than I should have. My heart was racing because I already knew what I was going to find before I even touched it. I picked it up with shaking hands, telling myself I was just going to confirm something small, something harmless, something that would calm my mind. But when the screen lit up, Rachel Dawson's name appeared again, and this time it wasn't just a single message. It was an active conversation thread. My breath caught in my throat as I saw message after message stacked in time order, showing that this wasn't random contact. This was ongoing emotional communication that had been happening behind my back while I was sitting beside him every night, carrying his child, trusting him completely. I didn't scroll far, but I didn't need to, because even what I saw in those few seconds was enough to change how I looked at everything. There were familiar tones in the messages, emotional familiarity, references that didn't belong to strangers, and a level of comfort that made my stomach twist because it didn't match the life Ethan was showing me. I placed the phone back exactly where it was, but I couldn't place my thoughts back into order anymore. That night, when Ethan came back into the room and acted like everything was normal, I couldn't even look at him the same way. I lay beside him in silence, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully, and I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just discovering a possible affair or a hidden connection. I was realizing that my entire understanding of my marriage might have been carefully controlled from the beginning, and I had only just started seeing the cracks. After seeing those messages, something inside me changed permanently, because now it wasn't just suspicion or confusion anymore, it was awareness I couldn't undo. I stopped looking at Ethan Brooks the same way, even when he was acting like the perfect husband during my pregnancy, even when he was smiling, cooking, checking on me, and doing everything that once made me feel safe. Now, every action felt layered, like there was a version of him I was seeing on the surface, and another version I was not allowed to see. I started noticing even more details I had ignored before, like how quickly he reacted when his phone buzzed, how he angled it away from me even during normal conversations, and how he sometimes paused mid-sentence when he heard a notification, like he was mentally shifting into another world I wasn't part of. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, but deep down I already knew I wasn't imagining the pattern anymore. One morning, after Ethan left for work, I found myself standing in the kitchen staring at his phone again, even though I promised myself I wouldn't check it anymore. My hands were shaking before I even picked it up, because now it wasn't curiosity, it was fear of confirmation. When I opened the screen, I didn't just see Rachel Dawson's name again. I saw enough to understand this wasn't a single emotional mistake or a harmless reconnecting of the past. This was an ongoing emotional relationship happening alongside our marriage. Messages that referenced time, memory, familiarity, and emotional closeness that didn't belong in a life where I was supposed to be his wife and carrying his child. My chest tightened because it became clear this wasn't something recent that suddenly appeared. It was something that had structure, continuity, and time behind it. And that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant I hadn't accidentally discovered a secret. I had slowly uncovered something that had been existing the entire time without my awareness. That was the moment I stopped feeling like I was reacting emotionally and started feeling like I was being forced into clarity. When Ethan came home that evening, I didn't confront him yet, but I looked at him differently, not with anger, not even fully with sadness, but with a quiet understanding that something between us had already changed beyond repair. And I knew that the next step wouldn't just be about what he was hiding anymore, it would be about what I was going to do with the truth I could no longer unsee. That night felt different the moment Ethan Brooks walked into the house, because I wasn't the same woman he had left that morning. I had spent the entire day carrying something heavy inside me, not just suspicion anymore, but certainty that something between us had already shifted beyond repair. He greeted me like always, calm, smiling, acting like the perfect husband during my pregnancy, asking how I felt, whether the baby was okay, whether I needed anything, but now every word sounded distant, like it belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. I didn't rush into confrontation, because I needed to hear it from him in a way that couldn't be softened or explained away. So I waited, watching him carefully as he moved around the room, acting normal, pretending normal, maintaining a life I could now clearly see through. Later that evening, when things finally quieted down, I asked him about Rachel Dawson. The moment her name left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. He stopped what he was doing, just for a second, but that silence was enough to confirm everything I had been trying not to believe. When he finally spoke, his answer was controlled, careful, almost rehearsed, saying she was someone from his past, that it didn't mean anything anymore, and that he didn't want to stress me during pregnancy, but none of it matched what I had already seen with my own eyes. Because I hadn't seen a harmless past connection, I had seen ongoing emotional conversations, Messages that didn't sound distant, but familiar, continuous, and alive. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just about Rachel. It was about the version of marriage I had been living in without knowing how much of it was carefully managed from his side. I looked at Ethan and felt something shift inside me, not explosive anger, but a quiet emotional clarity that hurt more than shouting ever could. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't break in loudly, it reveals itself slowly until you can no longer pretend you didn't see it. I told him I needed space, not because I hated him, but because I couldn't keep carrying a pregnancy inside a life where I no longer felt emotionally safe or fully included in the truth. He didn't stop me. He didn't argue. He just stood there in silence, like he already knew this moment had been coming long before I finally spoke it out loud. That night, I packed a small bag, not because I had all the answers, but because I finally understood I couldn't find them while staying in the same place. And as I left, I realized something powerful and painful at the same time. I had lost the marriage I thought I had, but I hadn't lost myself in the process. Backhand index pointing right if this story hit you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life style stories every day.